Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening and even good morning, wherever you are across the world. Thank you for joining us for our second session on War is Waste, an area that's crucial in the current food supply chain issues. Approximately $1 trillion is wasted a year of food. And this is an area that we really need to tackle on many different levels, moving really from linear production to a more circular model and discussing a whole host of different issues along the way. I don't want to take too much of your time because we have far more seasoned panelists than myself. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Hayley from Clearly So, who's going to be moderating and running the session for the next hour. So virtual round of applause for everyone and enjoy the next hour.
Thank you very much. As you say, absolutely. Waste is a huge problem for people and the planet. And it's not a hypothetical question, it's very real and it's happening all around us all of the time. So luckily, we've got a panel of experts who can cover the full breadth of food and waste. So it's going to be a good discussion. And so if we could get each of the panelists to introduce themselves, going by alphabetical order of first name. So that's Isabel, Juan, Julia and Tom.
So I guess I will kick off with the introduction. Thank you, Hayley. Can you hear me well?
Yes, that's great.
Great,
thank you.
Excellent. So yeah, thank you very much. My name is Isabelle Laurenceau. I am working for a fund called Triodos Organic Growth Fund. So Triodos Organic Growth Fund is essentially a impact fund providing patient capital to businesses in Europe that contribute to the food transition. We've been active for about 6 years now, and we invested in 12 companies across 4 main themes: sustainable production, the shift to healthier diets, fair value chains, but also importantly, the reduction of food waste and circular solutions. So food waste is obviously a very important part of our investment thesis.
Great, thank you. Juan.
Hey everybody, hi, thanks Hayley. My name is Juan, I'm the head of sustainability for Kerry Group. Kerry Group is a taste and nutrition ingredients company. We also have consumer goods division, 7 billion revenues, 26,000 colleagues around the world, 155 production sites. One of our key goals is to reach 2 billion people with sustainable nutrition solutions developed with our customers by 2030. And to support that, one of the key underlying goals is reduce food waste and loss 50%, okay, from our own operations, but also working with our customers to help them repurpose the food waste. We'll talk more about that afterwards.
Great, thank you. Julia?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julia Schichter. I'm responsible for the strategy analysis at TIPA. TIPA is a company working in the space of packaging, specifically focusing on one particular segment in packaging called flexibles, which basically packages today 40% of consumer goods, but end of life has no real recycling opportunities. And we're here to try to help that problem via making organically recyclable materials instead.
Sasha?
Hi, my name is Sasha Celestial One. I am the co-founder and COO of Olio. Olio is a platform which connects neighbors with each other and thousands of volunteers with food businesses every day to redistribute food that would otherwise go to waste. So it could be unwanted food in your own kitchen. Maybe you've cooked too much or you've had something accidentally delivered in your grocery order. But for whatever reason, if there's food that's going spare, it can be added to the app and then it alerts people nearby that food is available and they can pop around and pick it up. We have 2.5 million users all over the globe who have collectively shared 10 million portions of food with each other through the app. And that's Olio.
That's great, thank you. And Tom?
So my name is Tom. I'm the founder and CEO of TerraCycle and Loop, and we are a global waste management organization today operating nationally in 21 countries around the world, really trying to do 3 things to move from linear to circular. Our first division focuses on how do we collect and recycle hard to recycle product and packages, from dirty diapers to multi-layered flexibles. Our second division focuses on how do we integrate unique waste streams back into products so that they're made from higher amounts of recycled content, from ocean plastic to rock and roll festival waste. And finally, Loop, our newest division, is focused on how do we move from single-use to reusable consumption in a way that creates incremental features and benefits, value, and especially convenience. So excited to be here, and thanks for inviting us.
That's great, thank you. And I'm Hayley from Clearly So, and I help impactful companies to raise investment, usually in the range of 2 to 30 million. But that's great. We can see that we've got some real experts, and so let's crack on. First question is obviously going to be an easy one. Who does each person on the panel think is the main group or main contributor to food waste, and why is so much waste being created? And shall we start with Tom?
Sure. So I will preface, our core expertise is more around, physical objects and packaging, and less so food. But I would say that, if you think about the contributors to waste, it's hard to necessarily say it's one actor per se, but I would put it in these two ways. The producers and the retailers are the ones who give us the choices for what we can vote on. So they are sort of like the politicians who put their names on a ballot, right? And they give us the ecosystem of what we can choose, but then it's the consumer who then chooses within those choices and votes for the future they want with what they choose. And so if we shop in a supermarket and we choose to buy our fruits and vegetables, without using any form of packaging, then more of that will appear. If we go and buy things that are pre-packed or pre-produced, then more of those things will appear. And I think it's both of these are very, very important. It's very important for consumers not to just say, well, we are sheep to the slaughter and we're susceptible to marketing, and we are only can blame, the corporates. As consumers, we have to take the vote of what we buy exceptionally seriously and vote eyes open that we are voting with money for the future we want. But then producers, which could be the retailers who buy all the way to the brands who make, are responsible to give the choices so consumers can vote in ways that are better versus not.
Wow, thank you. Sasha, would you like to give the view as you see it?
I very much agree with Tom, actually. But the way I see it, just stepping back, over a third of all food produced globally goes to waste, and that's from farm to fork. And many people are surprised to find out that post-farm gate, over 70% of food waste in most countries, developed countries, takes place in the consumer's home. So here in the UK, the average household wastes 22% of their weekly grocery shop, and 70% of it is perfectly good edible food that is thrown away and not eaten. So I'm really anchored on food waste in the home. Most of us think that we don't waste very much, just like everyone thinks they're an above average driver. But the reality is, when you take an individual household's footprint, and it may be a few bananas, a half a loaf of bread, that milk you didn't eat, and when you multiply that by the millions and millions and millions of households in each country, that's where you're looking at sort of colossal, avoidable food waste. And I think the reason that happens is for a variety of complex reasons. But first and foremost, the average person is not aware that food waste is bad for the environment. Food waste is, the third largest contributor to the climate crisis. It's, a really sort of nasty problem that we're dealing with. But most people mentally think of it as food sort of returning organically in some type of nourishing way to the earth. And they don't understand the dynamics of the food supply chain and the carbon emissions that result from food waste and all of the sort of downstream effects. So I think a lack of awareness combined with the fact that for many people, food is really cheap and it's lost its value. Food as a portion of sort of household income has halved in recent decades, over the last sort of 30 or 40 years. And it's, for most people, it's relatively, it's not that big of a financial consequence when you let your fruit bowl go moldy, and sadly, obviously, we're living in a world where food poverty is in parallel with that and expanding with COVID. So I think a lot of it has to do with the consumer. Of course, we are given choices from the businesses that we buy from, but ultimately what we buy is what we're voting for. And what we throw away is also what we're voting for.
Interesting. Julia, is it fair to say that some of your product could sort of move some of that behavior?
Yeah, just to touch upon what Sasha and Tom said, yes, eventually 70% of the food waste is happening in the homes. It's exactly like the packaging that comes along it. But I think the problem is actually runs much deeper because in a sense, we've lost the connection between the land on which we produce the food and what goes into that and how we produce packaging and what happens to it end of life. If you take modern agriculture, then that's the number one reason why we kind of almost eroded poverty and lack of enough food for us and made food so cheap and so abundant for humans to almost be oblivious when they make choices in the supermarket and buy more maybe than what they need to purchase. And the same goes for plastic, which is what predominantly they use to package food. We make plastic out of extracting from the bottom of the earth fossil fuels, which are of course depleting, and we are making plastic in a way that is indestructible and will last in the environment for hundreds and hundreds of years beyond our generations. So, and again, that plastic is extremely cheap and is extremely easy to use. So as end consumers, we are faced with a global world in which food and plastic along it is extremely, extremely accessible and cheap, making us oblivious to the costs of, the practices of modern agriculture, which are depleting our soils in an alarming rate, and to the consequences of plastic usage and our incapability as humanity to get rid of it in a sustainable way.
Great, thank you. Juan, I can see you nodding, and given that you're part of a very big production company, I can imagine that you see an awful lot of breadth here.
Yeah, let me confirm some of the comments by the panelists. If you work out the numbers, right, 1.3 billion tons of food wasted every day or lost from farm to fork. That works out about half a kilo per person per day, right? So that is never consumed. Now, only 50% of that is in developed countries at consumption. So consumption and retail and food service are the key source of waste in developed markets. In developing markets is in the supply chain, right? Because the break of the cold chain or other issues in farming or manufacturing. Now, if you look at the absolute waste, Australia or US are top of the charts. 40% of the food is wasted. Emerging market is only 20%, right? So not everything is equal. It's very complex, and the solutions need to be targeted to where the food is lost or wasted. The incentives and the solutions at consumer level, at food service level, at retail level, at production level, or farming level need to be differentiated, right? So let me give you an example, one which is close to the consumer. Nowadays, with the food safety and knowing where your food comes from is paramount, right? Particularly in COVID. So protecting food is very important. So you want to maximize food safety. You also want to maximize the shelf life for processed food, because bakery or meat or dairy are the top 3 categories that are wasted, right? So if you can keep the food safe and fresher for longer, you maximize the shelf life, you're going to minimize the food waste. And you want to do that without too much packaging. That equation is really complicated. And last but not least, no chemical products. The consumer doesn't want any chemical products. So no e-letters, no chemical products, clean label. So as you want to develop these solutions that are natural, that the consumer will buy that maximize safety, maximize shelf life, and minimize food waste, it's complex, right? And that's where you need technologies to come in there. That's one of the things we do, right? We look at how to provide systems where you can replace, things like nitrites, for instance, in meat, which is chemical, petroleum-based, by something which is more natural, vinegar-based, fermented ingredients, natural extracts, botanicals, stuff like that, right? And so, but to do that, it's you have to, from a production point of view, you have to do that in an invisible way. So all the science is actually very complicated, but the consumer just want to make sure it's safe, it's fresh, and I won't have any problems, and I will minimize my food waste as I consume it, right? That's the equation we around the table have to deal with, right? It's a fascinating problem because the energy CO2 embedded in food waste is if food waste was a country, it would be the third largest CO2 emitter in the world, right? After China and the US. And land usage and biodiversity loss and deforestation that goes with that is crazy. We have 700 million people that go to bed which are undernourished every night. Okay, where does that food loss and waste go to nourish these people, right? So I think the equation here is going to be along the value chain. Nobody alone will be able to do it. It's collaboration with various partners in the value chain. And a lot of solutions will come at play. There is no silver bullet here.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Isabelle, from your point of view, who do you think are the main contributors, and why is there so much waste from the world as you see it?
Well, a lot has been said already, and I don't want to be redundant. Just to try to capture what has been said. Obviously, the consumer is the one driving the change, and we've known that in many industries, this is the one setting the agenda and pushing the corporates to react. But as also Juan put forward, we're now talking of this very huge issue, and to tackle such an issue, you need a kind of system approach. We're talking about a system redesign of our value chain, and I just want to take one example. In the US, 30% of fruits and vegetables are used in the HoReCa space. During the COVID pandemic, when the HoReCa was shut down, it was extremely difficult to, in a very short time, switch the stream from towards HoReCa to just retail. It is partly due to the inflexible value supply chain that we have, but also consumer habits that were not ready to basically intake such amount of fresh fruits and vegetables. There was a huge amount of loss. So in a period of time, in the last 9 months, where you see some countries with increasing food security issues, and on the other hand, more waste than ever, I think it really points not only to the blaming the consumer side, but to an inefficient value chain that requires a full redesign, where we reconnect the consumer to its food, so we should eat more local. We need to be closer to the food we consume, and redesigning a system. And we need to revalue those value chains as well. I think we haven't talked much about emerging economies. The challenge there is a bit different, but also the imbalance of power, disbalance of power is something that needs to be tackled.
Tom.
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting as we think about this topic too is to take it from a slightly different angle as well. As we think about it, how can we act? What can we do, out there as individuals or stakeholders? I think it's also really important to acknowledge that, not all food is equal. So in other words, a kilo of meat is much more costly thrown out than a kilo of bananas or a kilo of rice. If you think about sort of tropic levels, right? Every time you go up a level, so if you eat corn, you could sustain 10 times more people than that corn fed to a cow and eating the cow. And so, it's also very important to note that it's not all equal. If you, let's say, buy a hamburger and decide not to eat it and dispose it, that is equivalent to 10 times the weight if you bought vegetables. So I think, another way to grapple with this, because some of these challenges are each stakeholder can only take on so many of them. at one go. Like, it's very hard for a consumer who says, I would happily eat any size banana, but the only ones available to me are within the certain parameter that the retailer will purchase. But I can very much contribute to this by, eating proteins that are not animal-based. And really moving down, the level and having more of a vegan vegetarian diet, not just for your own personal health, but that will really mean whatever waste you produce is demagnified relative to if you're a high animal protein diet, then the waste you're producing is magnified literally by an order of magnitude.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and I think several of you have mentioned the education point, and it turns out that a member of our audience has also picked up on the education piece, but said that given the time that it will take to educate a population, is it better for governments and institutional investors to develop policies for producers to change their methods of production and distribution? Would that be quicker and easier than educating the population? I'm
not here
not
in the
entirely
UK.
sure, but I'm going to let Sasha go for it.
I was just going to say, not here in the UK, where the government is completely preoccupied with Brexit and a pandemic, and any regulatory decisions with regard to food waste are bottom of the list of priorities. So as much as of course you have to move both levers at once as much as you possibly can, but I think it's unrealistic to expect regulatory intervention everywhere and within the time frame that we're talking about. Change is needed to mitigate the effects of the climate crisis.
Great, thank you. There's a lot of nodding. Isabel, as an institutional investor, would you feel that you would flex your investor muscles at your investee companies to enforce change?
Well, we do invest in companies that are. There are a range of solutions to tackle food waste, and all of them should be combined. There's no priority. Yes, of course, government should enforce regulation to hold producers accountable until the end of life of their product, to improve the labeling and packaging. On the other hand, consumers need to be educated through awareness campaign. As an investor, we kind of focus on what we call investable solutions that are have clear revenue models that are scalable, and from that derives a scalable impact. So yes, we've invested in a couple of solutions already that are addressing actually alternative solutions to traditional recycling. We've invested in reusable coffee cups that you can use and for your morning coffee in your favorite outlet. We're investors in TIPA, also a very interesting alternative to our traditional recycling. But I would say, Julia, I will let Julia talk about it. We've invested recently in an interesting company called Farmy in Switzerland. It's an e-grocer that, by connecting directly farmers to the consumer, have essentially a zero inventory system, and leading to zero waste, because they just order to the farmer what is ordered by the consumer the next day. So all of those are contributing in their way to reducing the food waste.
Great, thank you. I think we've touched on technology, and so let's spend a bit more time on technologies and innovations which are going to make a change with dealing with waste. And as Isabel has given you the spotlight, Julia, would you like to tell us a little bit more about your work at TIPA?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So, like I said earlier on, TIPA addresses a particular segment in plastic packaging that is basically not recyclable. Less than 4% in Europe of flexibles are recycled, much lower numbers on a global scale. And flexibles are actually, because there is no economic value after you've consumed food that was packed in them, are the most predominantly what dominates plastic in the ocean. Almost 8 million tons of the 11 million tons that enter the ocean every year is flexible plastic. So we clearly have a problem here where we're packaging 20% of our goods in a package that is legal to use today, in a sense, if we talk about regulation. And so for us, we try to address the problem of food waste from the front end and from the end back. So from the foreign side of it, of course, you want to protect food to have enough shelf life. So from the moment it was picked in the farm or produced and packaged by the brand until you've consumed it, it has maintained the shelf life. And so that's an extremely important thing. The economic and environmental loss of that food is greater than anything else. So of course you want to protect first the goods. But on the back end, you want to make sure that that material that you've used to package the good is one that will leave as little footprint on the environment as possible. And as we touched upon, I mean, Tom sure will talk about the reusability model, which is extremely important and probably the most important factor here. But not everything can be reusable. If you have a shampoo bottle from a brand you like and it's stuck in your bathroom and you use it every day, and after a month you need a new bottle, reusable is a perfect solution for that. And we should have thought of it many, many years ago, and I'm very happy that TerraCycle have launched this thing. But some products, reusability is more complex, I would say. So if you have a granola bar which you want to grab on the go and just munch on, you cannot. It'll be very hard to pack that in aluminum or glass or something that is reusable, right? So for those categories that, in a sense, are less useful for reuse, are not fit for recycling, as what we do. You want to look at that third option, which is compostable, and that actually evokes also this kind of what I talked about, this connection back to earth. It's just, here's a food that you finish consuming, and then you discard the same package in the same bin with the leftover food, and that basically goes back to earth, where the natural or the circular system was not invented by people. It was invented by this life on the planet. So that's the same as an orange peel is actually food for the soil. So would be our package. So we're trying to create a system in which you're consuming food and throwing the leftover food with that package in the same bin. It goes into a compost, and then it actually nourishes back the soil, going back to this more than agriculture. Now we're depleting the soils, and the compost actually being an extremely important component in assuring the fertility of soil. So hopefully we've created a circular model that may work slightly in a different way than the common practices today.
I think the one thing that we're seeing is that we need a lot of solutions to get here. We need to come at these problems from all angles. One, you've brought in the kind of chemical solutions that go into the ingredients. So maybe you want to tell us more about how that sort of technology is working, or bring up another issue entirely.
Yeah, first is the idea is to take out the chemical solutions. That's the idea. But I think one of the important thing is what's the strategy you take, right? And that's really the waste hierarchy. The first thing you want to do is avoid the waste, right? And then if you can't avoid it, can you repurpose it into something useful? So first usage would be repurposed food waste into human food. You can't do that, animal feed or biomaterials, and you can't do that. You can do anaerobic digestion and back to the soil, but there are issues there with methane and other things, composting, etc. Or you can put it into energy, but this is less preferable, right? So if I take an example, historically, things that we and other companies in the food industry have done is whey. Okay, whey was a byproduct of dairy that you would feed to the animals. Nowadays, it's high-value protein for human consumption, right? Or side streams from meat, what my grandma used to do, right? On Sunday, the chicken, on Monday, the soup, and on Tuesday, the croquetas in Spain, right? So you repurpose food waste streams into useful food. You can do that for peels, orange peels and fruit peels, and you transform that into taste add-backs, natural flavors. So the industry have been doing that, but the question is, how do you apply this across the board, the circular economy principles, right? So you can do that upstream in the agricultural waste streams. And for instance, you could take the fruits that the farmer doesn't collect because they look ugly, etc. And you could do mini processing units that turn this into fruit powders, which are stable, will stay long, and you can reuse that much further, long time, and further out in the industry, in the value chain. Now I go back to what I said at the beginning. You know, the food safety risks that the food has. If you want to keep it longer on fresher, you have to work on the antimicrobial activity, antioxidation, the food protection, etc. The faster the food spoils, the higher the food waste, right? So if you take packaging out and you take chemicals out, you create more food waste. And that's a dichotomy that needs to be worked on, right? So the solution is looking at things that exist for a very long time. You know, fermented foods, vinegar, or things like that were done 2,000 years by the Romans. But how do you put the science of that and reapply these from food for food solutions to do food protection, shelf life, and food waste minimization, right? So that's where you look at fermentation metabolites, functional flavors, protective cultures, plant extracts, vinegar-based solutions, which are all food-based solutions to do the same things that sodium nitrite, lactates, diacetates, sorbates, or calcium that you want to replace do today, right? So that's not very visible, but it's very important, because as you do that, it's better for the consumer, but you're also replacing ingredients which are petroleum-based by food-based, right? So this is the type of things that the industry can do, right? And do at scale. And so that's very, very important. Now, once you can do that for downstream with the consumers, the retailer, etc., where you help them to maximize shelf life and minimize food waste, you can do upstream. Can you repurpose food waste from the industry to do something useful, right? So for instance, when you do beer, you have spent grain. Can you repurpose the spent grain from the brewing industry into something useful, a breakfast cereal beverage? And you can. So how do you do enzymatic conversion, fermentation, to take this type of food waste streams into very natural and nourishing products and solutions, right? So these are a few examples on how to apply circular economy principles into repurposing the food for something really useful.
Again, an awful lot of that seems to revolve around educating the consumer and getting the consumer to appreciate and see the benefit of these additional products that are coming from waste. It's a recurring question from our audience is what is the role of food transparency and knowledge transfer to the end consumers in reducing food waste? And I think you've all said that educating the consumer is essential, but I don't know if we have an answer to that just at the moment. Tom, would you like to give us your perspective from the other end of the chain, from production and packaging to when everything has been discarded or is heading in that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would start with is to say that I don't think there's a silver bullet to this answer if we think about, say, packaging waste. And you can proxy that to food waste as well. It's going to be an ecosystem. You know, we have to think about where can we avoid packaging altogether. Simple example is when you go shop, prioritize shopping for unpackaged foods and don't even use those little plastic bags. Just fill up your cart with loose fruits and vegetables and stay in the fruits and vegetables section. Try to avoid your meat section, and you can effectively live without packaging, and none of these problems exist. So try to find solutions where there is no packaging. If you are, faced with a choice where the answer is a package that is disposable, aim for one that has high recycled content and is recyclable, or compostable, or reusable. It's wherever you can meet the right solution. Now, that's what consumers can do. I think the important thing that we have to realize as business practitioners on how do we deploy these methods are sort of two key learnings to share. One is that when we think about our product design, we have tended to design all of our packaging and non-consumable products from a virgin mentality. What I mean by that is if you're we'll take Julie's example of a shampoo bottle. If I'm, working at a company and asked to design a shampoo bottle, I will design one with the capabilities of what virgin petrochemical polymer can do. Then that bottle comes into existence. And then maybe my company wakes up and says, oh, I need to start putting in more recycled content. Maybe I've signed up to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation pledge and so on. And then I am asked to put recycled content into that package, but that package was designed with the capabilities of what virgin material can do. And this is problematic because then I will say, well, I'd love to make that object out of recycled content, but so long as the recycled content behaves characteristically from a price standpoint and characteristically from a performance standpoint equal to virgin material. And the problem is that the only recycled content that behaves that way are municipally sourced beverage containers, period. Right? So if you're making a t-shirt from, say, PET, which is the material of a soda bottle, or you're making any object from a Frisbee to a t-shirt, from a shampoo bottle to a soda bottle, it's always using that same material. And there's simply not enough of that to go around. And the lesson in this, which is really important, is that what we need to start thinking about is not designing into what new materials can do, but what waste materials can do. That will just change the entire scope of our design process, but will allow us to eat way more of the garbage we put out, because humans have created a unique type of waste. The waste in the natural system, I would define as useless to the animal or organism that creates it, like the exhale of a chimpanzee or the fecal matter or the body once it dies, is useless to another chimpanzee, but is useful to many other organisms. So a normal type of waste that the planet can survive with is one that is useless to the creator, but useful to someone else. Humans have made something really interesting. Things that are useful to us and useless to us and useless to everything else. And that is a way to define the modern idea of waste. Because we've created all these incredible innovations in materials and so on, we have to then be the ones who are also responsible to eat those things back and be the organism that takes it back in our very complex systems. And we don't behave that way right now. And that is critically important to design waste out of the system, is to design with what waste can do, not with what virgin materials can do, and then think about how waste can behave identically to that, because it's very challenging. And it's why today, let's take a major step back and acknowledge that the recycling industry is collapsing. While people are waking up more than ever before, lawmakers are leaning in, banning things, from straws to bags. Consumers are, have created the entire anti-plastic movement, anti-waste movement. A lot of that coming at, with the epicenter being the UK. The actual systems that are out there to allow us to recycle are collapsing. And they're collapsing because oil is getting cheap, which makes recycled content less competitive. It's collapsing because end markets like China and others have stopped the importation of waste, which is what a lot of Western recyclers relied on. And it's collapsing because we're feeding the waste stream lower value materials. As packaging becomes lighter, it's physically less material, which means there's less value to recover, because remember, recyclers sell kilos, they don't sell units. And it's more complex packaging, which means more cost to even acquire that lower quality output and lower weight output. And so, we're in this sort of fascinating position where people are waking up, but the systems that are there to help support it are going in the exact opposite direction, and incredibly quickly. So, to solve for this, I think what we need to think about is not just what another stakeholder can do. Every time I sit in these meetings, I see, the industry say it's consumer education. The consumers say, oh, it's government regulations. The government, everyone points to somewhere else. It's total bullshit. You have to focus on what you can do yourself, period, right? If you're an individual, focus on what all of us in this panel have been saying, is vote smartly with your money, because you are voting whether you realize it or not, and take that vote seriously, because it's affecting, your life, but especially our kids and their kids. If you're an industry, don't point the finger on consumer education or anything else. Focus on what you can do by editing out bad choices and reinvesting in good ones, even if no one else will be aware of them. And if you're government, focus on how you can bring in regulations that make it more costly and difficult to do bad linear activity, and more profitable and easier to do circular activity, so that these models can grow. And that they can flourish, because there's too much of this sort of everyone pointing it to some other stakeholder, and that's really disingenuous in passing the buck. So we have to acknowledge, see this, because the systems there to support these ideas are not in the right direction.
Thank you. Absolutely, very, very passionate thought there, and absolutely, I think we're all here saying let's look in the mirror, which is great. But just coming back to one of the issues connected to the recycling industry collapsing. Certainly, in the past, I've been involved in some recycling type projects, and this is related to a question that a member of the audience has asked, is that an awful lot of these circular economy recycling type projects are terrifically capital intensive and very expensive to get off the ground, and in my personal experience don't always work or take a very long time to get to work. And so a member of the audience is asking what needs to be done to make exciting innovations profitable and investable, because an awful lot of these things are not going to generate returns, and so will not sort of attract the investment in the first place. I don't know whether you've got a view, Isabel, or whether, Tom, you've obviously raised investment for projects like this in the past. So I don't know if that's something either of you can address.
Just maybe saying a word on recycling, and it's true that I think it's recycling itself, like plastic, PET, is a rather old technology now. It's been going on for years, and when you look at how much is currently recycled, blaming on the technology, on the collection, or on the who is processing that recycling, the result is that very, very little portion of plastic is actually currently recycled. And I think, as Juan also mentioned, there's a hierarchy of what we can do. And the first one, and these are the basic principles of the circular economy. The first one is reduce, repurpose, revalue, and recycling is more or less at the end. Recycling is most of the cases is downcycling, because you cannot recycle forever, and at the end of life of that product will remain the same as plastic after a number of recycled cycles. So recycling is not the only the best solution, and it has not scaled for potentially that reason. We see a lot of other alternative solutions, like obviously bringing products with a end of life back to nature, like compostable, and obviously the loop solution and of reusable packaging that indeed can be an extension of the material's life. But I'll let Tom add on to that. I'm sure he has a lot to say.
Yeah, I think to first double click on what Isabel said, and then Haley, to your question on investment. The most important thing to follow in recycling specifically, and this is where I think there's a massive gap, is one thing and one thing only. Is it going to be profitable for the actor that has to execute, which is only one actor? No other actor matters. It's the waste management company. If the waste management company can process that material at a profit, it will do so without anyone holding its hands. And if it would cost more to collect and process the material than the results are worth, it will not do so, no matter how much subsidy you give them, because those are only going to be temporary blips that create nice sort of pilot projects that then don't move forward. What we need to really focus on is, what are we feeding the waste stream, and is that something that the actual handlers of that stream benefit from or are harmed by? And this is important because it boils down to that. Usually producers tend to focus on the R&D of a package. Let's move it from multi-layer to mono-layer, make it a little bit easier to recycle. Then let's temporarily invest in some infrastructure, and then take this as a little bit of a joke. Let's sprinkle chemical recycling over anything we don't have an answer for. So and that's sort of every multi-stakeholder coalition distilled down into what goes on. And what people really need to be addressing is not that, because none of those are the answer. If there are profitable business equations, infrastructure magically appears. You don't have to babysit it. And if there are unprofitable business equations, infrastructure will go away, and it will, you can't hold the hand. So it's really important to focus on, are we creating objects that these end-of-life managers, waste management companies, want to handle or not? Now, we can do that in three ways. One is we can just increase the value of the packaging. Here's a joke. If you made every package out of solid gold, you will not have to worry at all about collection and processing. It would be a non-issue, right? So one is you can increase the value of the package, but that may mean moving from cheap flexibles to things like aluminum or rigid PET. That will increase the price of the product, so you have to deal with that negative. A second option is to have taxes come in and artificially fund, the difference between the actual profitability of collecting and recycling that waste stream versus what it needs to be to have a waste management company want to do it. And the third option is for companies to voluntarily do that on their own and use that as a way to maybe differentiate from their competitors and gain market share and win. And all three of those models can be run. There's not one is the answer, but those are the three major tactics. In the end, from an investment standpoint, I do see a huge influx of more investors looking at impact, or conscious investments, whatever moniker you want to put on. Let's say the most common word would be impact investment. There's more coming. But in the end, the impact part gets you in the door as someone who's raised, a pretty good amount of capital in this space, but it all still comes down to what is your core P&L profitability, your traditional metrics. And we are not yet seeing, I would say, a shift where the impact quotient shows up on the P&L in a way that you can value the impact, but at least the impact is something that people are more interested in hearing about. So those at least will facilitate more audiences.
Great, thank you. Julia.
Yeah, I just want to go back maybe to the question about innovation. TIPA started almost a decade ago, and for sure when we started, there was no real appetite in the world for what we were producing or hoping to launch into this world. And I think it was almost impossible to imagine how rapidly things will change. And so, first of all, to encourage innovation. I think we live in a transitional moment in life. We are now realizing more than ever the impacts of food waste, the packaging waste, and this is a moment in time for innovation. And I think we're just starting to launch new solutions, like Tom said before. It's like we rely on plastic or on PET to give us almost everything we need, which is not the case. So hopefully we have now a better understanding in the world that we need more opportunities, and much more than we actually have today in the market. And we don't really know where it's all going to go, but we for sure know what are the gaps today and what can or cannot be fulfilled with the existing technologies. So for sure there should be a space for these moonshots and for ideas that we don't have today in the market, but in 10 years time we may completely disrupt the way we produce and consume goods today. So just to say an optimistic note on that.
Very good.
I would like to add something to what Tom said around the my waste is your product, right? So if we treat waste as a raw material that has value, and we create a market for it, and it can be done not only at the end of life at consumer to recycle, because that's the end of it. As we said, if we can repurpose and reuse industrial or farm raw materials as inputs into other valuable products, you create virtual positive loops there of creating markets and products that are self-sustained, because they are profitable, you create value from that, etc. So if you can create from, and it doesn't have to go back into food. Sometimes you can do food waste into polymers, packaging. We can imagine creating plastics, it's possible, out of food waste, or you can do that across industries, right? So you can do out of bakery waste, you can do beer, right? So there are many examples like that where using these principles that Tom and everybody's been talking about, but creatively, right? So my waste is your product, and so how do you create a market with that, with where you can interchange that? So easy said, not so easy done. So for us within the group, what we're doing, we have 157 sites across the world. You have to identify all the what you produce, and are there things that you can reuse in the factory that you have in China? Can you reuse it, hopefully locally or somewhere else? And when you start mapping that, you realize that you can reduce, not only you reduce your waste, but you can reuse it in many very interesting and innovative ways. We have, I don't know, more than 1,000 scientists in the company, 300 PhDs. They're really smart. So when you give them the challenge, you put the goal, reduce 50% of food waste, and everything else needs to be repurposed. Nothing can go to landfill. Nothing can be burned. Nothing is, you can't take it out of the circuit. You have to reuse it. people come with really smart solutions. So I think putting these boundaries there, and voluntary is going to be a lot faster than the government putting it on you, because by the time we have laws agreed, that's the lagging indicator. That comes at the end. What we need is the innovators to create markets and competitive advantage for these very, very smart products, right? And I gave some examples in the past, but as we speak, we are working on very interesting solutions out there. But it's not only Kerry. I think that the industry has realized that we need to do that because the consumers want to buy sustainable products. You know, the thing is that anything which is branded sustainable is selling 5x faster in the US and capturing 50% of the growth. If you want to read that, New York Stern University, fabulous study. They looked at all the SKUs in retail. Anything which is branded sustainable is selling 5 to 7x faster, and it's accelerated with COVID. If we explain to consumers the benefit of turning food waste into products, the yuck factor and the I'm not sure what this is will turn around. Consumers nowadays are very, very smart. And we can inform them very quickly, right? Yeah. So sorry for the passionate plea here, but I think it's in order.
We love the passion. It's great that everyone is feeling passionate about the subject. Sasha, I think this is touching on consumers are intelligent and powerful. This is the very roots of your business. And I wonder, do you hear much from your community of users around someone else's waste is someone else's? I mean, in your situation, it's not a problem. It's their product. It's their advantage. But do they have views on packaging and all of that thing? Sorry, you're on mute.
Hi. I mean, that's quite a broad question. I do think
I'm letting you say whatever you want to.
I think it's complicated because on the one hand, you would think that the topic of food waste would be sort of peaking in terms of conscious consumerism, people being aware of the issue. But actually, I think plastic waste has really sort of stolen the show for the last few years. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's provided something very tangible for people to fixate on. And it's also really quite visible what decisions you can make in your everyday life, simply, not using straws, not using plastic bags, etc. I mean, whilst I think that's great because it has, really a lot of people have woken up to the impact of their choices they make on the physical environment around us, plastic pollution, etc. It's provided, I think there's a lot of confusion around whether or not that is or is not actually impacting the climate crisis. And people think that sort of plastic pollution is linked directly with the climate crisis, and they're not understanding what decisions they're making in their lives on an everyday basis that are actually driving a hotter climate, such as food waste, such as not having a plant-based diet. And I think there's still a massive disconnect between what is really, causing, what are the greatest levers we have as an individual, and what are the things that I'm doing today, like not using a disposable coffee cup. And I'm not trying to be dismissive because every step is a positive step and we don't need everyone to do everything perfectly. But to Tom's earlier point, different decisions have a different impact in terms of the magnitude of the carbon emissions that you're averting by making a lifestyle change. So we are working really hard to try and take people on that journey. I won't go into all of the things that we've done, but we have a whole section in the app, which is called the goals section, where people can sign up to really small, but also really big changes, lifestyle changes to live a greener life, whether it's switching to ethical banking or it's simply, not storing two types of, not storing your bananas incorrectly. And then giving people points for that and, trying to bring influencers in. And basically the whole idea is from our consumer research, one of the things that we've learned is that people feel very, very, very overwhelmed by the magnitude of choices that are out there. And they sort of a lot of people just want someone to tell them what to do. Like, these are the 10 things you need to do. And if you do those 10 things, you're going to get a B+, and that's good enough. Thank you very much. And so it is complex. We need to simplify it, make it more accessible, and also help people to understand what specifically is the impact of the choices that they do make so that they're optimizing for what it is that they care about.
A member of the audience has asked, and forgive me, I'm just reading out the question. Why do supermarkets not force bio covers for customer usage? And why do they not provide options between regular plastic and bio covers? And why don't they make regular plastic an expensive option to force customers to use organic bags or carry bags?
Supermarkets do what's in their best interest. They're looking at shareholders, customers, employee, they're looking at several different factors, and they're optimizing so that they, doing their own internal calculus. And it's at this point in time, they're not getting feedback from any particular customer segment that says that this is important and I'm going to spend extra money on this type of packaging to force you to make a desired behavior change that you're not willing to make in the absence of this subsidy. Yeah. So I think they're rational, right? Supermarkets are rational organizations, and the feedback they're getting from their stakeholders is that that's not the rational decision to make at this time. That would be my answer.
That's great.
Build on what Sasha says. We've noticed this, for example, in the Loop platform. I was hopeful that many people would be attracted, because sustainability and reuse. What we've really clearly learned running this now in 3 countries, with good amount of data, is that the average consumer wants value, convenience, and features and benefits. And noting none of those 3 things are sustainability. Now, for some, mostly women, less so men, sustainability is a feature and benefit, and they'll value that. But it only is at best a feature and a benefit. And so what's really important in all these innovations, if we want to have them adopted at scale quickly, is that we have to play in to how do we make sure it drives the right value for all the stakeholders, that the brands make the right amount of money, the retailers make the right amount of money, and the consumers, pay the right amount, for what they perceive they get. Second, it has to be a neutral or improvement on features and benefits. For example, in reusables, it does do that because you get a better, higher quality product. And then third, and this is very important, it also has to drive the same convenience for all the stakeholders. And this may seem like a very much of a bounding box, but if we want to get to large scale change quickly, we have to accept that that is the framework we have to work within. And I think play downhill. I think 2 examples, in tangential industries. I think Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat have done a phenomenal job on playing downhill, not saying, hey, buy this for all the vegan animal rights reasons. They don't communicate any of that. They communicate it's a great tasting product, and they sell it right beside the meat. That has created a huge amount of momentum in the, in the protein category. Electric cars, same thing. They're able to sell on performance, and that's creating major momentum. And I think that's very important in the social, purposeful business space, is that the more you can make your models win in the traditional lens, then you have really something that can scale quickly in today's environment and not rely on some of the larger cycle things like behavior change and the next generation companies. They're all optimistic things, but those are going to take a long time to manifest.
Thank you. On that note, we've got 2 minutes to go, possibly less. And I wanted to give you all the opportunity to say, if you were king, queen, or ruler for the day, what change would you ask people to make? Starting with Juan, and in a few seconds, if possible, please.
Yeah, I think the EU Commission just came out with an intent to put on the packaging information for consumers, on nutrition information, on environmental information. It could have waste repurpose information. I think that we don't have to wait for that to be a law. The intent is fantastic by the EU Commission. I think the consumer wants to vote and buy sustainable, but it has to be convenient and add value. For my wish would be that everybody is very transparent. If you don't put it on the pack, but you don't have the space, put it on your net or whatever, right? Do what Oatly is doing now, CO2 on the pack, and then explain to everybody why don't everybody does that, right? Great. So more information to consumer at point of sale, explaining what happens all the way back to the farm, and create a massive competitive race to be the most sustainable possible.
Thank you. Julia?
I think one day was not going to be enough to change. There's so much that needs to be changed. But on the consumer side, make conscious choices. Look at labels. Look at what that food you're purchasing. What are the ingredients? Are they actually good for your body or not? And for that package, is it sustainable? Does it make sense to use that? And once you've consumed that food it's done with the package, and if you don't have a reusable or you have a compostable, put it in, or if you have a composter, put it there. If you have a community composter, put that food waste with the packaging waste. Make sure that compost goes back into the land and feeds the soil that needs that as its own feedstock.
Great, thank you. I'm really very sorry that we're running out of time, but if we can quickly pass over to Isabel, Sasha, and Tom, and then I will thank you all now. Thank you for participating. Thank you to our audience, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the conference. So, Isabel, do you have a quick word?
Yeah, I'll try to be very quick, and I think what needs to happen now is the consumer to ask for just fair and transparent pricing. More easily said than done, but we need to integrate in the pricing of our food the right carbon pricing, the footprint, the externalities. Food waste is one externalities, and if we do that, the consumer won't have to choose with its conscience, but with just a pricing that perfectly reflect the amount of resources that it has used for the product to be built, and that would simplify the choices of the consumer and make also businesses more investable. I will stop there.
Thank you.
I was just going to sort of use my powers to magically brainwash everyone. I think most people would feel that it's completely unacceptable, socially unacceptable, to walk down the street and just litter and throw trash on the street in front of other people. And so I would like to brainwash everyone so that wasting food becomes as taboo and socially repulsive as littering.
I'll conclude quickly by saying one thing. Please just stop buying stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.